Welcome everyone to Temple Sinai's Adult Education Program. We're so pleased tonight to learn more about the Synagogues and Jews of Prague. Just a couple of process notes. We are recording this session because Mr. Risch actually gave us permission, and we hope that's okay with you. We will stop the record after the presentation, before the question and answer period, so that you can feel comfortable to ask any questions that you would like. We ask that you mute your audio during the presentation, but it would be great to see your faces if you want to leave your video screens on. And for those of you that are friends of Jerry's and not a member of Temple Sinai, well, we would love to have you as a member, first of all, but second of all, thank you so much for coming. And for those of my colleagues from Temple Sinai, really great to see you as well. So let me introduce our speaker for the night. First of all, I would like to thank Renee Steinberg, because without Renee, we wouldn't have known about Mr. Risch's wonderful presentation. And so Renee, do you want to kind of say hello so everybody can see who you are, because not everyone knows who you are. So
hi, and we're in for a treat, everyone.
There she is. So thank you again, Renee. So I'm going to briefly introduce our speaker tonight. Jerry Risch earned a bachelor's in political science from Cal State, from CSUN, where he won numerous awards in intercollegiate forensic competition. That sounds really, really interesting. He later earned a JD from a law degree from Whittier Law School. And then he worked in the private sector as an in-house counsel at First Charter Financial Corporation, which is a holding company for American Savings. He worked for the G. Boswell Company, which is the largest privately owned cotton grower in the world. And he worked for St. John's Hospital and Healthcare Center in Santa Monica. And for the last half of his 32-year legal career, he was a trial attorney with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So the later, of course, it was called the Department of Homeland Security, where he represented the United States in enforcement of Immigration and Nationality Act. And he defended the service and the department against charges in employment matters, and was honored by being named Employee of the Year. So that's quite an honor. Jerry is now enjoying retirement. Good for you, but he's not retired really, because he's here. But he is now enjoying retirement as president. He is of SAGE, a lifelong learning organization, as part of the Dean's Council of the Mike Curb College of Arts, and I believe that's at CSUN, isn't it, Jerry?
Yes, it is.
And the Media and Communication Department at CSUN, and he is a docent for the Autry National Center of the American West. I think a lot of us have been there. And one of his wonderful claims to fame is he's been married for 46 years. That's great. Has 3 children, 2 grandchildren, and is very much looking forward to sharing the extraordinary and significant story of the Synagogues and Jews in Prague. So let us please welcome Jerry Risch, and we're so excited to have you. So take it away, Jerry.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. It's been a pleasure working with you and Susan, putting the program together tonight. I'm just going to begin. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to open up my slide presentation. Just take a moment here. Whoops, I have to stop share just for a moment. All right, and there we go. Let's see, where are my, where did it go? There it is. All right. Whoops. It's jumping around on me. Okay. You know what? I am going to do this a different way because my computer is playing with me here. get my notes in front of me. Can you all see that all right?
Yes, it looks beautiful.
Okay, very good. All right. We can begin. Prague has been described as a golden city. It's the capital of the Czech Republic. And let's see. There we go. And ancient Bohemia. And it has a 1,000-year history. Today, as you can see, it looks like a fairy tale town. Its synagogues include the Altne Schule, or Old New Synagogue, the Mazel, the Pinchas, the High Synagogue, the Klassen, the Spanish Synagogue, and the Jubilee, also known as the Jerusalem Synagogue. And they are all interwoven with Prague's history. A simple review of those synagogues, though, without placing them in the context of their times, their eras, with a portrayal of the Jews and others who lived there, would only be cursory. And so we'll explore the architecture and the people of Prague, Jews and non-Jews alike. And along the way, we will reflect on the man of mud and the man of steel and a horrific act of repugnant retribution in World War II. Jews have lived in Prague since at least 970 CE. And by the 11th century, a Jewish community was fully formed. In the late 11th and 12th century, Prague's Jews were persecuted, first in 1096 by the Crusaders, and then about 50 years later, when the Jewish quarter below the castle was destroyed. So they moved to the right bank of the river Vltava, which is the Moldau in German, if you're familiar with Smetana's music work, which became the Jewish quarter. Many Crusade survivors were forced to convert to Christianity. In 1179, the church announced Christians should avoid touching Jews. Jews were also forced to build their community close to the old town square. This limited their movements, identified them, and it was the beginning of a Jewish ghetto. By day, movement was free, but in the evening and on festivals, the gates were locked, which largely protected Jews from harm. And in an ironic twist, a city space near the ghetto was named Crusaders Square. A prominent feature of the square is a large statue, you can see it there, of Charles IV, the Holy Roman Emperor. Keep him in mind when I return soon to the Jews of his time. Conditions did not improve in the 13th century. In 1215, for example, the Fourth Lateran Council mandated specific and distinctive clothing for Jews and Muslims to separate them from Christians, presaging the most infamous part of dress in Jewish history. Whoops. The Old New Schule, or Altne Schule, Yiddish for school and Middle High German, also meaning school, is the oldest site of Prague's Jewish town and the oldest synagogue in Europe. It's been the primary synagogue of the Jewish community for more than 700 years. It was completed in 1296 by royal stonemasons working in the nearby convent of St. Agnes. And it reveals the important status of the then Prague Jewish community. Initially called the New or Great Schule, it wasn't until the founding of other synagogues in the late 16th century that it became known as the Altne Schule, or Old New Schule. The Old New Synagogue, or Schule, is a rectangular structure with a large saddle roof and Gothic gables. The main building is surrounded on 3 sides. Why are you not moving? I'm going to stop this for a second. Try this. There we go. It's surrounded by 3 sides by low annexes, one of which serves as a women's section. You can see the women's section through the hole there in the wall. It's the only way the women could look out and see the services, which is where we are sitting in relation to that window. Only by this narrow aperture. The 6 bays of ribbed vaulting on 2 large octagonal pillars arch the interior. 12 narrow windows correspond to the tribes of Israel. During the early to mid 14th century, Emperor Charles IV, the one I mentioned before, whose statue is in Crusader Square, and his successor and son, Wenceslaus, relinquished some of their power over the Jewish community and allowed others to manage Jewish activities in return for large payoffs by allowing debtors to break loans with Jewish lenders. This began a power struggle lasting 200 years between royalty, burgher landowners, and countryside nobility over control of Jewish affairs and finances. During Easter of 1389, Prague clergy declared Jews had desecrated the Eucharist and incited mobs to loot and burn the Jewish quarter. Nearly every single one of the Jewish residents of Prague, 3,000 people, were murdered. Many survivors were baptized. One of the few survivors was this man, Rabbi Avigdor Kara, whose tomb is preserved in the old Jewish cemetery. He wrote a moving elegy about that attack, and it's read every year in Prague on Yom Kippur. In the 15th century, a new balance in Prague favored the nobility, landowners, and the burghers who replaced Jews in jobs such as banking. Jews were forced to pledge loyalty to these groups and pay for protection. But it was unclear who protected best, leaving Jews to guess who to select while running the risk of choosing the wrong so-called protector. The Pinchas Synagogue is mentioned as early as 1492, but the building may be much older. It's the second oldest preserved synagogue in Prague. It was built in the late Gothic style. It was founded by Aaron Meshullam Horowitz and probably named after his grandson, Rabbi Pinchas Horowitz. The Pinchas Synagogue features Gothic and Renaissance elements with a narrow, high single nave, supported by pillars, fluted shafts, buttresses, and Renaissance rosettes. All are part of the impressive decor. The synagogue was expanded from 1607 to 1625 when windows, a women's gallery, and a foyer were added. There were 420 seats in that synagogue in the early 1600s. The structure of the Pinchas Synagogue is not the only reason to visit. Visiting the Pinchas Synagogue is poignant and powerful. From 1955 to 1960, it was converted to a memorial for Jewish victims of the Shoah from Czech lands. 77,297. A voice reading names of the victims provides a moving soundtrack. Family names are in red, followed by first names, birthdays, and the last date the person was known to be alive. After they invaded in 1968, the Soviets closed the memorial for more than 20 years. It was reconstructed and reopened in 1995. There's still another reason to visit the Pinchas Synagogue. It may be even more haunting, focusing on Jewish children interned in Theresienstadt and the world-famous children's drawings drawn there between 1942 and 1944. The images document transports to and daily life in Terezin, dreams of returning home and life in a Jewish homeland. They were drawn under the guidance of this lady, Friedel Dicker Brandeis, who was murdered in Auschwitz in 1944. About 4,500 of the drawings were found in suitcases she buried in the children's barracks. Most of these children were sent to Auschwitz shortly after creating their drawings. About 8,000 children under 15 were deported from Terezin. 242 survived. As emotionally involving as the Theresienstadt Children's Memorial and Shoah exhibits are, a visitor is not done yet. Next to the Pinchas Synagogue is the Old Jewish Cemetery, the only cemetery for Prague Jews from 1439 to 1787. Prague Jews weren't allowed to be buried outside the ghetto, so there are as many as 12 layers of graves. About 100,000 Jews are interred there. The 1500s are considered Prague's Renaissance. The ghetto became a center of Jewish mysticism. Artisans and intellectuals came from all over Europe. Though Jews were isolated from so-called high culture outside their community, some Jews were able to become mathematicians, astronomers, artists, geographers, historians, and philosophers. From 1522 to 1541, the Jewish population of Prague almost doubled. Many Jewish refugees expelled from Moravia, Germany, Austria, and Spain came to Prague. The ghetto grew since Jews could now buy adjacent property to build their homes. The High Synagogue, financed by this man, Mordechai Mazel, was completed in 1568, the same year as the adjacent Jewish town hall. A striking feature of the hall is the clock on the gable, which runs backward like Hebrew script, contrasting with the belfry whose clock runs clockwise. The entrance to the High Synagogue was upstairs in the town hall, a location probably inspiring its name. Services were held here until the autumn of 1941, when the Nazis turned it into a warehouse. From 1950, it became a showcase for the Jewish Museum before being revived in 1995, when it's been used for weddings, rabbinical study, and prayer. I promised earlier a reflection on the man of mud, and this is a good place to insert him into the story. Everyone knows the man of steel, Superman, who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. But who is the man of mud? And what does he have to do with Superman and the synagogues of Prague? The golem, not to be confused with the golem of the Lord of the Rings, was created from clay to protect Prague's Jews. According to legend, Rabbi Judah Low, which is a translation also known as the Maharal, created the golem. This man of mud was given superhuman strength and may also be an inspiration for Frankenstein. But that's another story. Rabbi Loew became chief rabbi of Prague in 1597, known as I said, the Maharal, and which is an acronym, by the way, for Morenu Harav Yehuda Loew ben Betzalel, meaning our teacher, Rabbi Judah Loew, son of Betzalel. He founded the great Talmudic Academy in Prague and was famous among non-Jews for his knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and other sciences, and as a friend and intimate of Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. The story relevant here about Rabbi Loew is one where Jews of Prague were threatened with anti-Semitic pogroms, often holding Jews guilty of, among other charges, the blood libel, the allegation Jews were murdering non-Jews, notably Christian children, to obtain blood for Passover and other rituals. The Golem's legend tells us that the Maharal went to the Vltava River, as I said, that's in German, it would be the Moldau, and shaped a man from clay. Using the mystical wisdom to bring the clay to life, the Golem, Hebrew for shapeless mass, arose, went to the ghetto gates, and fought, wounded, and killed those who would attack Jews. Rabbi Loew successfully, and by the way, this next bit of information, thank you, Michael Halpern, for this. Rabbi Loew successfully begged Emperor Rudolph II to issue a decree outlawing the blood libel. The golem wasn't needed any longer and was taken to the synagogue attic. Reversing the ceremony, bringing him to life, the golem returned to clay, was wrapped in 2 talisim, and hidden away. Rabbi Loew swore those who participated to absolute secrecy. Consider then, the late 16th century golem was very much to the Jewish community what Superman was to Jews and Americans in the 1930s. Both were created to give people strength and hope to fight for justice during a crisis for Jews. There are several books analyzing the subject. Superman is Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's American Golem. Siegel and Shuster were classmates at Glenville High in Cleveland and great fans of comics. They saw their stories as their road to success, but were disillusioned after struggling to interest newspapers in their hero. So they sold their rights to Detective Comics, known today as DC, in 1938 for $130, about $2,390 today, resigning themselves to failure. But a star was born. The Nazis were plainly aware of Siegel and Shuster's work and understood its symbolic value. Goebbels denounced Superman, and the SS newspaper Das Schwarze Korps, the Black Corps, ran an editorial in 1940 mocking Siegel as, quote, intellectually and physically circumcised. Others believe Superman's origin lies in the notion, in Nietzsche's notion actually, of the Übermensch, twisted into Hitler's belief of the superiority of an Aryan master race. And of course, both are wrong. As you've already heard, Superman's roots lie in Jewish mythology. Both Siegel and Shuster were Jewish, sons of recent European immigrants, as were Bob Kane, by the way, and Bill Finger, who debuted Batman in DC Comics in 1939. Persecution of Jews in Germany, the Soviet Union, and Italy was patently obvious to these young men who were unable to intervene and dreaming of a savior. When asked later what led him to create Superman, Siegel said, quote, "Hearing and reading of the oppression and slaughter of helpless, oppressed Jews in Nazi Germany, seeing movies depicting the horrors of privation suffered by the downtrodden, I had the great urge to help them. How could I help them when I could barely help myself? Superman was the answer." It's been said Siegel and Schuster based their hero's origin story on Moses, his strength on Samson, his mission on the golem, and his nebbish secret identity on themselves. But there are other influences. They are also thought to have been influenced by Zygmunt Zische Breitbart, a Jewish vaudevillian, strong man who performed in Cleveland when they were young boys, the American folk hero John Henry, Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars novels, actors like the exciting and heroic Douglas Fairbanks, and the silent film star Harold Lloyd as Clark Kent, whose character wore glasses that Lloyd himself did not need. Superman himself channels the experiences of Jews wanting to assimilate, veiling their heritage, but true to their roots beneath social camouflage. He's also, of course, a nebbish, timid at heart, the product of two teenagers dreaming of impressing their own Lois Lanes. Religious parallels are explicit in Superman movies, that is today, and tend to be overtly Christian. Warner Brothers, for example, marketed the movie The Man of Steel in 2013 to Christian ministries and included sermon notes joining Christ to Superman in materials entitled Jesus, the Original Superhero. For some, parallels to Superman as Christian is clear. Notably, in the latest films, Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice in 2016, and The Justice League in 2017, which dealt with the character as a resurrected Christ figure. But for now, we'll let the Golem and Superman rest and return to 16th and century Prague and 17th century Prague. The reigns of Maximilian and Rudolph, their reigns lasted from 1564 to 1612, were a golden age for Prague Jews. Rudolph was indifferent to the Catholic Counter-Reformation in the Habsburg Empire. This allowed many scientists and intellectuals to assemble in Prague and practice without the church's interference. Jews were given economic freedom and Jewish culture flourished. And as you've already heard, Mordechai Maisel thrived during this period. He was a brilliant financier, businessman, and philanthropist, and served as mayor of the Jewish town, funded many Jewish groups, financed building a public bathhouse, ritual baths, an almshouse, donated money to build the Jewish town hall and synagogues, paid for paving the streets of the Jewish quarter, gave money to charities to help feed the poor, clothe the needy, provide dowries for poor women, and purchased a garden to extend the old Jewish cemetery. Not only did Mordechai Maisel donate money for local causes, he donated Torah scrolls to many other Jewish communities, including Jerusalem. He also established a Talmudic school, a hospital with baths in 1564, and the Clausen Synagogue. The Clausen Synagogue was named after the Latin claustrum, meaning small building, and was situated in a dangerous, decrepit neighborhood. During its golden age, the Clausen was one of the largest Jewish town structures. The Clausen was one whose appearance comes from reconstruction at the end of the 19th century. The main nave and the women's gallery were enlarged, and the staircase and facade was then repaired. As were other synagogues, though, the Clausen served as a storehouse during World War II. The Nazis destroyed most of the interior, but renovations took place in the last half of the 20th century. Since then, the Clausen has been part of the Jewish Museum. Exhibits focus on the synagogue, explaining its significance and describing its furnishings. It also deals with Jewish worship, Shabbat, and life events such as holidays, births, circumcisions, bar mitzvahs, marriage, and divorce. During Emperor Rudolph II's reign in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, Jews in Prague thrived culturally and economically with greater freedom, though anti-Semitism still existed, of course. Mordechai Maisel was one who prospered, as you've heard, and he built a private synagogue called the Maisel Synagogue. Rudolph allowed him to build the three-nave structure, the largest in the district, with 20 pillars and a huge main nave. The Renaissance building, with some Gothic features, was ornate and contained many Torah mantles. And then came 1689. A suspect arsonist set fire to Prague's old town that spread to the entire Jewish area, where all 318 structures were destroyed, including the Maisel Synagogue. The vault caved in. Only 14 of its 20 pillars and the external walls remained. Its style today, as you can see, is neo-Gothic, which was popular at the turn of the 20th century when it was rebuilt, and stained glass was added to the windows. After World War II, the Maisel Synagogue became a center of Jewish reform. During World War II, the Maisel served as a storehouse for Jewish treasures brought from throughout Bohemia and Moravia. Services didn't take place there. They don't take place there today, but the synagogue does function still as a Jewish museum. After the war, the Nazis had planned to make it and other synagogues a repository for what they called a museum of a vanished people, also known as the Museum of an Extinct Race. After World War II, 1,564 Torahs were in danger of decay. The Memorial Scrolls Trust, a London-based nonprofit that preserves Torah scrolls and other scripture, registers and catalogs the Torahs by condition. Those found unusable are designated for display. My own synagogue, Temple Ramat Zion in Northridge, has one on display. The rest are repaired for synagogue use. Since the 60s, nearly 1,400 scrolls have been sent on permanent loan to congregations all over the world, with the majority located in the United States. A Torah the Nazis stole for their museum, written in 1890 in Brno, for example, a town about 100 miles from Prague, was returned last year for use on Simchat Torah by Et Chaim, a progressive Jewish congregation in Prague. In the early 1700s, more Jews lived in Prague than anywhere in the world. Jews were 1/4 of Prague's population then, but the golden age ended with the ascent of this woman, Empress Maria Theresa, who ousted Prague's Jews between 1745 and 1748. Conditions improved during the reign of Emperor Joseph II, Maria Theresa's eldest son, and by the way, Marie Antoinette's brother. especially after he issued the Edict of Toleration in 1781, affirming religious tolerance. He allowed Jews to join in all forms of commerce, the arts, and agriculture. Jews were permitted to build factories and school systems, and were even allowed to join institutions of higher learning. Jews were not only able to learn Hebrew and Yiddish then, they were permitted to study basic accounting. Jewish respect for Joseph II was so favorable, they named the Jewish town Yosefov, and that's what it's called today, after him. During the 19th century, Jews gradually became emancipated when civil equality was granted in 1849. The ghetto was established in 1852, and Yosefov became a district of Prague. In 1868, the Spanish synagogue was built at the site of Prague's oldest Jewish synagogue. Unfortunately, it fell into ruin after the Nazis and later the communists ruled Prague. It wasn't reopened again until its 130th birthday in the 1990s. The Spanish synagogue is square with a dome covering most of the space. On three sides are galleries. It's absolutely magnificent, editorial on my part, that enter the main nave with decor featuring Islamic motifs, but Spanish Jews never used the synagogue. The Spanish synagogue, that is. It's named after the Spanish-influenced exterior and the Moorish interior designs, as you can see. Chiefly a inspiration from this building, the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. The most striking part of the Spanish synagogue may be its dome, with accents of Spanish, Islamic, and Czech influence. Coordinating much of the Jewish heritage in Prague today is the Jewish Museum, a museum I've mentioned on occasion, which includes the Mazel, the Pinchas, the Clausen, and the Spanish Synagogue, the Ceremonial Hall, the Robert Gutman Gallery with displays of Jewish life, and the Old Jewish Cemetery, which you've heard about. Founded in 1906, it's one of the oldest Jewish museums in Europe. Abolished in 1939 after the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, it became a haven for liturgical objects, books, and documents from destroyed World War II Jewish communities. After the war, the museum was nationalized and unable to take control of its extensive collections. The communist state also made it impossible for the museum to develop its research activities, which could not and did not resume again until 1994. It was then that its buildings were returned to the Prague Jewish community, and the bulk of its collections returned by the state to the Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic. Today, many of Prague's Jewish sites are administered by the Jewish Museum of Prague. The same year the Prague Jewish Museum was founded, that is 1906, the Jubilee, also known as the Jerusalem Synagogue, was built in honor of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, his silver jubilee. When Czechoslovakia became independent in 1918, it's been called the Jerusalem Synagogue because of the Austro-Hungarian defeat in World War I and its site on Jerusalem Street. The idea to build the synagogue came from the Society for a New Temple, established in 1898 after urban renewal began in Yosefov, and there was a need for a synagogue that would replace three others that had been demolished. The Jerusalem Synagogue is Moorish revival with Art Nouveau decoration, especially the interior, where Moorish elements are overlaid with brilliantly painted Art Nouveau patterns. The facade's horseshoe arches and interior columns support the women's gallery. After a century as a synagogue, except during the Nazi era, of course, when it stored confiscated Jewish property, on April 1st, 2008, the Jerusalem Jubilee Synagogue opened its doors to tourists and admirers of historic architecture. And once again, it's absolutely beautiful. At the outbreak of World War II, almost 92,000 Jews lived in Prague, about 20% of its populace. At least 61,000 of those 92,000 Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. More than 60 Czech synagogues were destroyed, and more than 260,000 Czech Jews were slaughtered. Of 15,000 Czech Jewish children shipped to death camps, 132 survived. The communists closed 90 more Czech synagogues and dozens of Jewish cemeteries. After World War II, about 15,000 Czech Jews remained. By 1950, half of those left for Israel. Our second related topic to the synagogues of Jews and Jews of Prague concerns another World War II event, the destruction of the town of Lidice, mass murder, and concentration camp deportations. While not directly related to the Jewish experience in Prague or during the Shoah, it intersects with a larger story of persecution, tyranny, and brutality. Lidice was located just outside of Prague. June 10th, 1942 will mark the 80th anniversary of not only its destruction, but its obliteration. The story leading to the slaughter begins with Reinhard Heydrich's assassination. Heydrich was the Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, a territory created by the Nazis after invading Czechoslovakia. His assassination was codenamed Operation Anthropoid. There's a movie that covers the story. It's very difficult to watch, but it's a fine movie. The two men chiefly responsible for his assassination, Jan Kubis, a Czech, and Josef Gabčík, a Slovak, were soldiers in the Czechoslovak army in exile in Britain. On May 27, 1942, Heydrich was a passenger in his Mercedes convertible. Gabčík jumped in the middle of the road and aimed a machine gun at the car. His gun jammed. Kubis quickly threw a grenade into the car. And after a brief firefight, Kubis and Gabčík escaped. Heydrich died a week later in a hospital. The final solution was renamed Operation Reinhard in his honor, since he had been one of the architects at the Wannsee Conference. The Nazi response was vicious. More than 13,000 were arrested, including Kubis's girlfriend, who was murdered in the Mauthausen concentration camp. Estimates vary, of course. One states 5,000 were murdered alone in the search for Heydrich's assassins. A Gestapo report suggested that Lidice was hiding the assassins, since several Czech army officers exiled in England were known to be from that town. The report was wrong. The Nazis knew it, and it did not matter. Just after midnight on June 10, men over 15 were taken to a farmhouse and women and children to Gladno. The men were placed against the wall in front of a firing squad in groups of 10, standing before mattresses, which you can see there, to prevent bullets from ricocheting. The executions lasted through the morning, with 2 pauses for the executioners to be served schnapps to relieve their fatigue. By that afternoon, 173 men had been executed. Women who refused to leave their husbands were also shot, and missing men were hunted down and murdered. Meanwhile, in the nearby Kladno, 9 children were deemed racially acceptable and sent to German foster families to be re-educated and assimilated. One of those children, Václav Zelinka, who later became mayor of Lidice and helped spread its tragic legacy, died just this last November at the age of 83. By the war's end, 340 of Lidice's 503 residents were dead as a direct result of the June 10 massacre. 143 women and 17 children, including those born after the attack, eventually returned to their devastated community. The rest of the children had been loaded on trains and sent first to the Lodz ghetto and then to the Chelmno extermination camp. After the inhabitants were gone, Lidice was razed, the buildings destroyed, and the cemetery dug up. Jewish inmates of Terezin were forced to dig mass graves. The rubble of Lidice was removed and fields were planted over the ruins. The world first learned of Lidice with this Nazi radio message the day after the attack. All male inhabitants have been shot. The women have been transferred to a concentration camp. The children have been taken to educational centers. All houses of Lidice have been leveled to the ground, and the name of this community has been obliterated. Maria Lemonova, recent director of Lidice, of the Lidice Memorial, said they were proud of it. But the global community reacted with outrage and a promise to keep Lidice's memory alive. Towns changed their names to Lidice and named streets and parks in its honor. In 1944, exiled German author Thomas Mann wrote, "The Nazis are stupid beasts. They wanted to consign the name of Lidice to eternal oblivion, but have engraved it forever into the memory of man. Hardly anyone knew this name before they razed it to the ground, and now it's world famous." No sane person can view the world's response to the atrocities, these atrocities, with other than support. But a look below the surface reveals a calculating and careful Allied reaction concerning Jews. On December 17, 1942, the United States, British, and other allies issued a statement condemning the Nazis' annihilation of European Jews, but were hesitant to stress the Jews' plight. The people of Lidice were seen as universal victims. Europe's Jewish population represented a far more politically charged demographic. With rising anti-Semitism and German propaganda, such as this well-known poster of the time, which reads, "Hinter den Feindmachten, der Jud," behind the enemy, the Jew, 1942. Accusing the Allies of bowing to Jewish interests, Lidice was a neutral, indisputably vile example of Nazi immorality. The Holocaust raised a separate debate. There were several reasons for the Allies' restraint toward the Holocaust. Nazi propaganda, one of which you see on the screen here, insinuated that the Allies were only fighting the war to protect Jewish interests, and the Allies wanted to refute that claim. In the United States, anti-Semitic sentiment was growing, and many believed Roosevelt was overly bound to Jews. The Allies also believed widespread knowledge of the final solution would lead to demands for increased immigration quotas, aiding Jewish refugees, which would infuriate isolationists and foster greater instability. Elizabeth White, a United States Holocaust Memorial Museum historian, stated, "The Allies emphasized the Nazis were a threat to all humanity, that the war was about freedom versus slavery, and when they would condemn Nazi atrocities, they highlighted attack against peaceful citizens." Thanks to the evidence provided by the Nazis themselves, the Lidice massacre became a powerful Allied propaganda tool. By focusing on atrocities against all innocent individuals, the Allies spurred patriotism without incurring claims of overzealous interest in Jewish affairs. But what of Jan Kubis, Joseph Gobchik, and others in Operation Anthropoid? I'd like to tell you that they escaped. I cannot. A traitor told the Nazis about safe houses, including that of the Moravkova family. Marie, after capture, told the SS that she needed to use the toilet. So she went into the bathroom, bit into a cyanide capsule, and died. Her husband was not part of the plot, but their 17-year-old son, Vlastimil Ata Moravkova, who knew of the safe houses and where the assassins were hiding, was tortured, made to drink an excess of brandy, shown his mother's severed head in a fish tank, and was warned that his father would be next. Ata broke. On October 24th, 1942, Ata, his father, his fiancée, her mother, and her brother were executed in Mauthausen. Kubis and Gobchik and 5 others took refuge in the Karol Boromajeski church. What they had to defend themselves were small caliber pistols. 750 SS troops with automatic weapons and hand grenades laid siege. 3 of the 7 were killed in the prayer loft. The other 4, after SS attacks with firearms, tear gas, and fire trucks brought to flood them out, failed. They committed suicide in the crypt before the SS could reach them. The battle between those 7 men in the church and the 750 SS officers lasted 14 hours. I visited that church when I was there a few years ago. It's a memorial to these men and incredible to visit. It's overwhelming. When World War II ended, Lidice was rebuilt close to the earlier site. There's a haunting memorial there today. Marie Uchilatova's memorial to the children's victims of the war is 82 sculptures of Lidice's murdered children. Lidice warns us about the danger of unchecked evil and how easy it is to forget. It's from that perspective that we can view the numerous attempts to marginalize and exterminate Prague's Jews, crusaders, the church, emperors, burghers, Nazis, and communists All tried to disparage, defame, or destroy them. The 1948 post-war communist takeover marked the start of an era of stagnation for Prague's Jewish community. By 1950, about one half its Jewish residents left for Israel and other nations. This memorial to the victims of communism in Prague evokes communist victims between 1948 and 1989. The statues appear decayed, as you can see. You can look through some of them, with lost limbs and bodies breaking open, symbolizing communism's effect on its populace. Nazi racism had been replaced by political and social prejudice. Most Prague Jews were branded class enemies of the working people. Between 1950 and 1964, there was no possibility of Jewish emigration. Assets belonging to the Jewish community were seized by the state. Charitable organizations were disbanded, and the community's budget provided by the state was drastically reduced. The communist anti-religious policy resulted, for all practical purposes, in the end of bar mitzvah instruction and religious wedding ceremonies. By 1964, only 2 cantors and 2 sheikhets remained. Jews found it easier to hide their identity during the communist era, and many didn't even learn of being Jewish until that regime's fall in 1989. The quotation at the bottom is on a plaque, by the way, on this slide. It's on a plaque, which is on one of the steps there of this memorial. In May of 2000, dozens of paving stones made from Jewish gravestones were found during a Prague restoration, confirming long-held speculation the communist regime raided synagogues and graveyards for building material. František Banyaje, chairman of Prague's Jewish community, said, quote, "More Jewish synagogues were destroyed in the Czech Republic during communist times than under the Nazis. When my wife and I visited Ukraine about 5 years ago, our guide said the communists didn't hide their vandalism. They were proud of it. And destroying gravestones didn't matter because they said, well, they didn't need them anymore anyway." Institutions and partial return of property began in 1994. Today, the Jewish Town Hall houses the Chief Rabbinate and the Federation of Jewish Communities, created to revive Jewish communities under the former Soviet control. This is their seal, Federation of Jewish Communities of the CIS. CIS, for those of you who may relate, is not Citizenship and Immigration Services, but is the Commonwealth of Independent States. Based at the Jewish Community Center are the Terezin Initiative, a group for Czech Holocaust survivors, the Hidden Child Group, the B'nai B'rith Lodge, and the Czech Union of Jewish Youth. Prague has a Jewish kindergarten, elementary school, high school, and 2 retirement homes. Services are held in the Old New, the High, Jerusalem, and Spanish synagogues. According to a 2020 study of European Jewry, the number of self-identifying Jews in the Czech Republic fell by half over the past 50 years to 7,000 today, from 14,000 in 1970. But there are signs of a Jewish revival. JCC Global, a nonprofit seeking to link more than 1,000 JCC's Jewish community centers worldwide, states Prague had the only online JCC to launch last year. But there's a sense of urgency. Prague was home to many whose Jewish identity was destroyed by the Holocaust and decades under communism. Those people are aging. And if there is any hope at all of rousing their Jewish ties, it must happen quickly. The goal is to involve not only Jews who identify according to Orthodox halakha, but to reach those of all ages with a sentiment for Judaism and Jewish roots. As a result, the average age of Prague's Jews has dropped from 70 in the 1980s to about 55 today because of increased involvement of younger Jews. It's a start. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention and welcome your comments and questions.
Well, thank you, Jerry, so much. Susan, did you want to stop the record now and we'll open the floor up for discussion, or I can stop it too. I'll stop it.